Dear friends, there was a time when I was also a young man. Sometimes I think that I'm still one. And instead of making a speech, I will ask you a question. What is a Jew? I know not in all periods of our life there are people who have a history of 4,000 years. The same answer could be given. But I will begin with the answer which was given 400 years ago. A Jew is a person who's keeping the 630 commandments, Taryag mitzvot. Well, without knowing you personally, I doubt whether you are keeping 100 of these 630 commandments. So you cannot say you are a Jew because you are keeping these 630 commandments. I know that not always did the Jews keep all these commandments, because I read in the Bible that until the king Yoshiyahu, they never kept Passover. Since the time of Joshua. But then, because they were still in the desert, only 40 years after they left Egypt, they kept it. But since then, they didn't. And they were Jews. Later, I read in the book of Nehemiah, I don't know how you pronounce him in your bad English, I mean in bad Hebrew. The English is perhaps good, but it's not correct. His name was Nehemiah. That they never kept until then Sukkot. You call it tabernacle, but in Hebrew it's called Sukkot. And they were Jews. I read in the prophets, but they were very angry with their people. Not because they give money to Israel or to Jews. It was never mentioned in the whole of the Bible that a Jew must give money to Jews. And I heard that you're collecting money for this fund and for bonds and other things. Well, this is not mentioned in the Bible. It's not mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. So I ask, what is a Jew now? If I will ask what is an American, although I'm not an American, I know more or less the answer. A man who's living in this country, who's speaking this language, who is a part of the history which made America, not from the old, because America, the people who made the history here, if they made history, but they were living here, 500, 600, 800, 1,000 years ago, you almost don't see them. I was several times in America, and those real Americans I've never met. They're called Indians for some reason. Because Columbus, when he came to America, he really wanted to go to India. And he thought he came to India, but he was mistaken. But he is a part of the history of America, let me say, in the last 300 years. But what is a Jew? It's a very serious question. And I understand still you say you are Jews. And I trust you. I have no doubt about that. Then you don't need to say it if you don't believe it. But there must be a meaning. What is the meaning of it? I will tell you in what sense I am a Jew. I am not a religious Jew. I was born in a free-thinking family. And I cannot say I ever observed the 613 mitzvot. Very few I observed. For instance, marriage is a very important law, Jewish law. I married my wife in the municipality of New York I brought 2 witnesses, paid $2, and the mayor or some official, I don't know, arranged this. At that morning, I had a meeting with my friends, and I used to come punctually to the meeting, but then I came a little later, with 15 minutes. They asked me, why are you so late? I said, I married a girl. It was not according to the way most of the Jews married. But still, I regard myself as a Jew. And I doubt whether there is any Jew who wouldn't regard me as a Jew. At least I'm a Jew. I don't agree with what you say about me, and I'll tell you why and how I am a Jew. I know a people, every people in the world, have their own language. Perhaps with the exception of the Americans. They haven't got their language. They speak English. But they consider it now as their language. But I, as a Jew, I have my own language, which was our language for the last 4,000 years. And if I will accept every word in the Bible, verbally, every word, then I could say that 5,727 years before, the first sentence which was pronounced by God when he created the world was 2 Hebrew words, he or. In English it cannot be 2 words, so I will translate it into Latin, fiat lux. In Hebrew it will be, I'm afraid, 4 words, let there be light. But he said it according to the Bible in Hebrew. This was before there was a Jewish people. But at least this was the language of our people for 4,000 years. But not only that. Because we have a country. And the country was promised us, according to the Bible. I wasn't there. I wasn't living at that time. And I can say, I can guarantee it was so. But I know this is written in the Bible, and we were reading and learning the Bible at least the last 2,500 years. And certainly this influenced our outlook. So the Bible told us that 4,000 years ago, a man came from Babylon, a place which is called Ur-Kasdim. It was discovered in the last century. And God promised him that he will give to him and to his children and to his children's children. In Hebrew he said, into your seed. But your children and your grandchildren, I will give this land. And I know this is our land. And I knew it before I was there. When I was a child of 3, I knew it, and I thought I will not remain the place where I was born, because I have nothing to do with that land, and I have nothing to do with that people. The Russians, I don't belong to the Russians. But not only that, I know that we had a history of 4,000 years, and a unique history, a very tragic history. No other people had such a history. But not only tragic, also a creative history. We created books which had a great influence, not of the whole humanity, but of a great part of the humanity, of the Christian world and the Muslim world. Because there is still, perhaps more than Christians and Muslims, there is still in Asia more who are neither Christians nor Muslims. And they don't know anything about our past. And I met them. I was in Burma a long time, and I had their friends. And for them, they can't understand what connection have Jews living in America or in Poland or in Russia with the land which is, we call it the land of Israel. They know nothing about it. But a great part of humanity, for them, our Bible is also a holy book. And many of them, not all of them, but very many, I'm afraid more than Jews in America, read and learned the Bible. So I know I belong to Jewish history. I belong to Jewish country. This is my language. This is my history. So I know what is a Jew. And the same thing with my children. I have one boy only. I have two children, two girls and one boy. One was born in America, a girl, then a boy born in England, then another girl was born in Jerusalem. And while, for instance, my boy, he married a non-Jewish girl. He was in the British Army, the Jewish Legion. It was the brigade, not the Legion. It was called the Jewish Brigade. He was sick, he was in hospital, and there was a nurse, and they fell in love. And she was a Goya, but she agreed to go to Israel and to become Jewish. I was called to London after their marriage, and I went to see the rabbis in London to make her Jewish. They told me it must take a year. I said, a year? I don't want them to stay a year in London. They want to go back. He's demobilized now. Why should they stay? He said, no. Why must it take a year? And they said they must teach us certain things which here I don't want to say for young girls. I told them, I have two daughters. They've never learned it. Why must she learn it? He said, no. You cannot make her Jewish unless she learns this. Happily, I met a friend who came from Germany, but now he's living in America. And I think if he will ask what he is, he will say he's an American. Perhaps some of you heard his name, Joachim Prinz. I knew him from Germany, and I knew him also from America. And I told him, I know he's a rabbi. I said, perhaps you will do it. He said, let me talk to her. And I will have a conversation with her. I will tell you when I can make it. He had a talk with her, and then he came and said, all right, I will make her Jewish, and she became Jewish. What he did, I don't know. And now she's there, and sometimes, as her mother language was English, she sometimes speaks to her children in English, but all of them know English. They answer only in Hebrew, because this is their language. So in spite of the fact that my family, there's one who was before a Goya, or as we used to say, a shiksa, very nice shiksa and a lovable shiksa, but she's Jewish. And she accepted that. And her children feel Jewish like me. Their language is Jewish, their country is Israel, and their history is Jewish. But what is a Jew here? Language, you speak English. But you call yourself Americans. Well, all Americans are Americans, although they speak English, because they haven't created their own language. I know whether you know, in the Constitutional Convention in America, after the revolution, there was a question, what should be the official language? And one of the members of New England made a proposal, the official language should be Hebrew. There was another who made a proposal should be German, because at that time they hated England, because they fought against England. Unfortunately, they didn't accept that Hebrew should be the official language, and they accepted English. So your language is English. You are living in this country, and as far as I know, you are living more comfortable than Jews in any other country, even than many Jews in Israel, although they are more happy than you are. I wouldn't say all of them, but on the whole, yes. When I ask a young Jew here whether at least he read the Bible, some of them say yes, with some hesitation. Then ask in the original, he said, oh no. But the Bible is only in Hebrew. There's no such thing as English Bible. This is quite a different book. You cannot translate the Bible. Not only that, any great book cannot be translated. I had an experience. There was one writer who I had a great admiration, but I couldn't then read his language. And I read it in Russian, in French, in English. And I saw great differences. And I felt I don't know what he really said. And that writer was an ancient classical writer. His name was Plato. His name was Platon, but you could say Plato, all right? It's Plato. So I decided I must learn Greek. And I did it. Only when I read him in the original, I knew really what he meant. And I saw his greatness. Although I didn't accept all his views. But he was one of the greatest men ever lived. Among the 10 great men who lived. since the creation. So I met very few here who read the Bible in the original. So I asked, what is a Jew here? It's a very serious question. I know all of you admit you are Jews, and you mean it. And everybody accepts it. But I, coming from a Jewish country, speaking Jewish, Hebrew is Jewish, not what you call here Jewish. Or Hebrew would be rather more correct to say. Even it would be more correct to say Vrit. But they changed it a little. I can't help it. Just as you say David. My name is David, not David. And King David was called David, not David. And I had a friend, an American, who told me not to call him his family name, but by his first name. I said, what's the name? Jacob. I said, you want me to call your name? I will call you Yaakov, not Jacob. And me, you should call not David, but David. And when he sent me a letter, he always signs in Hebrew, Yaakov. This is the only word which he signs in Hebrew, because he cannot read it. And I signed David. So really, what is being a Jew? This is a very serious question. Because if behind the name there is nothing, it's a question, will it last? And the question, will it last, is not a new question. When the second Commonwealth was destroyed, we had two Commonwealths. The first Commonwealth from coming to the land of Israel to the 6th century BC, and the second Commonwealth, which was destroyed about 100 BC. Since then, you were dispersed throughout the world. But the Jew then he observed the Jewish law. And they made special laws which are not in the Torah. Although the tradition says all the things which they made new commandments, but it was a tradition from Moses. Well, I prefer to say Moshe, not Moses. Well, after all, Moshe was his name, and he was the greatest Jewish leader, the greatest Jewish prophet. I will call him by his name, not by the name which the Goyim gave him. Moshe. Although I doubt whether really it is true that he gave two Torah, one in writing and one in saying. But this is the Talmudic tradition, that the Torah mitzvot was given by Moshe, but not in writing, but it was by tradition. But these new laws were made, and that they were made anew, there is a story in the Talmud, that God said to Moshe once, in the future time there will arise a great Jew, whom I would give the Torah if I haven't given to you. So Moshe said, I would like to see him. God said, all right, go to that place and you will see him. And what he meant was Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest Tanaim. And he came to his Bet Midrash, to his school, and was sitting there and listening what he's teaching. And he didn't understand what he's saying. So he was he felt very badly. He didn't understand what he's saying. And then one of his students asked him, where did you take that law? And Rabbi Akiva said, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It was given in Sinai through Moshe. And Moshe understood what it is. That means they knew that they made new laws, but even Moshe didn't know them. But they said to the people, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Because they made many laws in order the Jew should not be assimilated with non-Jews. Their way of life should be quite different from their neighbors. But in order to keep it, they said it is given in Sinai, but not in writing, but traditionally. And this kept the Jews for many hundreds of years, although they didn't live in their country. They didn't speak anymore their language because Jews changed their language many times. There were, even when the Second Temple, there were a great Jewish community in Alexandria, about 1 million Jews. They all spoke Greek. And they were the first who translated the Bible into Greek. The Greek translation of the Bible was perhaps the first and only translation which was made in ancient times. Before that, they used mostly Aramaic, which is also a Semitic language, quite little, differs a little from Hebrew. Later, many of them spoke Arabic. And our greatest wise men, like Maimonides, few of you have read it, but you heard the name, I imagine, Maimonides, Rambam. Usually Jews call him Rambam, but the guy call him Maimonides. He was the son of Maimon. He wrote his philosophic work, which is one of the best philosophical works in the Middle Ages, in Arabic. And so did Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, one of the greatest Jewish poets. Poetry he wrote in Hebrew. But he wrote also a philosophical book. It was a conversation between a king of Chazarim and a Jew. He wrote it also in Arabic, because then the Jews spoke Arabic. Later, Jews spoke in France French. With a great commentator of the Bible, Russia. Perhaps some of you heard Russia, the name. You didn't learn, perhaps. He was the greatest commentator of the Bible. He used, when he couldn't explain in Hebrew words what it means, so he gave it in French. But then it was a little different French than ours, but it was nearly to French. Because the Jews spoke French, and they spoke different languages. I remember when I came the first time, some 60 years ago, to Jerusalem, the Jews in Jerusalem spoke 40 different languages. But still they knew, all of them, that they have one language which is theirs, and this was Hebrew. Many thought it's a dead language, but it was not really, it cannot be said it was a living language because it wasn't spoken, but it was not dead. All the poetry was written in Hebrew. The prayer was always made by Jews in Hebrew. At that time, they hadn't yet got the Reformed Judaism, and the prayers were made purely Hebrew, even by those who didn't understand what they are saying. As I found out when I came once to America, and I went to a Orthodox synagogue, one was having mafter, and that mafter was a purely Zionist article. So when he came down, I asked him, "Did you understand what you said?" He said, "No, I didn't. I don't know words." He knew only to read. But they knew they'd have a Hebrew language. And these two things, the laws in which they differ from their surroundings, and the knowledge that they belong to the Jewish people, that they have their own country, which they believed and hoped to go back to that country, although they were not living there. And they were not living there for hundreds of years. This kept Jewishness. Now it differs, especially in this country. You have here the greatest Jewish community we ever had in the diaspora. But not only the greatest in numbers, also the greatest in richness. This is the richest Jewish community we ever had. And also the most politically influential community, because you are equal in rights. And I don't know how it is now, but I know when I came the first time to this country, it was 52 years ago, the Jews was concentrated in a few big states, and they could decide, as you have only two parties, they could decide which one should be elected. Jews in America have the greatest political influence they ever had in any other country. And while there may be or there may not be anti-Semitism, but if I were living in America and be a Jew like you, I wouldn't care if you're an anti-Semite. Although when I was the first time, I went to a friend of mine when I was the first time in America. I went to Connecticut State, they had their farm, and there I saw an advertisement And it was said the first word was either limited or something like that. I asked him, what does it mean? They told me it means it cannot be sold to Jews. I said, what? There is not complete equality in this country? He said, yes, by the law, but he may not sell to Jews. I said, can you stand that? And I said, they couldn't understand why I'm so angry about it. They were used already to it. But I couldn't be used to it because I came from a country where I had the feeling I'm in my own country. What, I discriminate between me? But on the whole, no, I don't know whether this lasts. Now, there are places where they will not sell a house to a Jew. I know, but it was so sometime. But in spite of that, Jews had equal rights. And if, in addition to all that, you don't know what is a Jew, there is a grave danger that Jews will be assimilated. And I know there is a process of assimilation going on in America. But as you say, I'm a Jew, that shows that you are worried. You want to preserve Jewishness. How will you do it? Well, I know you will not accept my answer, and I will not tell it. Because there is a saying in the Talmud, just as you ought to say something which people will listen to, you shouldn't say something which they will not listen to. And you understand what I mean. But remaining here, and I know that even the best Jews will do what I want them to do, and I believe they can and may do it, still the great majority will remain here. But the question is, will they remain as Jews or not? This is a very serious question. When I came the first time to America, I had a friend. He told me there will be no assimilation because of 5 cents. I was amazed, why 5 cents? He said, very simple. Jews are living together in Williamsburg, in New York, in other places, and there are enough boys and young Jewish girls and young Jewish boys. To marry a Goya, you must pay 5 cents and go with the elevator. At that time, there was an elevator in New York, or with the subway to look for a Christian girl. Why? Why must I spend 5 cents? But no, things have changed. They are not living all together, and you must not spend 5 cents to look for a Christian girl. Because he goes to university, and there you find boys, Jewish boys and Jewish girls, and non-Jewish girls and non-Jewish girls. And there is a real danger of assimilation. And I ask the question, what is a Jew? And and I will say briefly, but in my view, ought to be a Jew here. And not only those who will come to Israel. This is what I would prefer. But I know you prefer to remain here. Unless you teach your children Hebrew, unless they are capable and willing to know the Hebrew Bible and know the Hebrew history, and they will know what maintained the Jews throughout history when they were in their land and they were few and there were many enemies, what maintained the Jews the last 2,000 years when they were persecuted in every country and hated, and they are the only people who remained under these conditions. And what was, it brought them back to their own country after 2,000 years. No state in our time, in no other time, was established under the same condition as the Jewish state. Only when you will know that, this is the answer, what is a Jew? Hebrew education, knowing Hebrew Bible and Jewish history, and personal contact, even those who will not go to live there. Personal contact with the Jewish country, with Israel. There you will see certain things of which I can tell you, you will be proud that you have a Jewish community who are doing these things which are not being done in any part of the world. As the time is short, I'm not going into that. Unless you give this answer, really, I don't know what is a Jew. Those who are observing, they are Jews. I know, because this was the answer which they gave for the last 800 years. But there are many who are not observing. And I'm afraid the majority are not. But even those who are observing, I am not quite sure whether their children will observe. I am coming from a little town in Russia where almost all the Jews were observant Jews. But all their children became Epicursian. None of them was observing, and they went to live in Israel. And their fathers were so fanatically observant, they believe it's a crime. A man who doesn't want to stay until Messiah is coming in bringing all the Jews there is not a Jew. There was one case when the boy went to the land of Israel, the Karakriya, as if he died, and sit down for 7 days on the earth. He never asked whether his son is alive in Israel or not, because he considered this the greatest crime. Although he was very fanatical, very devoted to observance, but the children were not. And I'm afraid that even the Rabbi of Satmar, have you heard that name? The most fanatical Jew who is living in America, I'm not quite sure that his grandchildren will be observant Jews. Because I know all my friends became free-thinking and went to Israel, their fathers, except my father. They were all Hasidim, very observant. But the boys were not. And the same thing may happen here. And I'm sure those who are sitting here, that their fathers were observant, but I doubt whether you will find here 10% observant Jews. So this alone is not an answer, although an observant Jew is a Jew. If one will tell me I'm an observant Jew, that's an answer. Then he's a Jew. But then he believes in Israel, that Israel is his country, not America. If he doesn't believe in that, he's not an observant Jew. בבקשה.